Hey guys, what's up? Z here with Gizchina, and I have here the Voyo VBook V3 with the newest Intel Apollo Lake Pentium N4200 processor. It also has a large 12,000 mAh battery, as well as an unusual combination of a 128GB M.2 SSD, as well as a 32GB eMMC drive as well. That being said though, the biggest star of this laptop is still the new Pentium N4200 processor, and I couldn't wait to find out how well it performed. So let's get right into it. So the laptop is made out of matte soft rubber, which doesn't feel very premium, but it also doesn't feel cheap either, and is very nice to the touch. This is the same as all the older Voyo VBook V3 shells as well. The shells remain unchanged, but the internals do change. When you open the laptop up, you see some really big bezels around the screen that really make this device look kind of ugly and dated as well. And you compare it to my Xiaomi Air 12, and this is definitely not a compact or a light laptop. You also have two USB ports, a micro SD card slot, as well as a mini HDMI port as well. You can flip the screen all the way around 360 degrees, and it makes it work exactly like a tablet. That being said, because it's in tablet mode, you also have the volume and power buttons on the left side of the device, as well as a switch to turn off the keyboard and the trackpad when you're in tablet mode. So moving on to the keyboard, it's plastic, it doesn't feel very high quality, but it also isn't cheap either. The keys require more resistance to press compared to my Xiaomi Air 12, which can be a good thing because sometimes I would accidentally press a key that I didn't mean to on my Xiaomi Air 12, and it's a lot harder to do here. The trackpad isn't too big. I would have preferred a bigger trackpad. Accuracy is pretty good, 2-finger scroll works pretty well, but that is actually the only multi-finger gesture this laptop has. You don't have pinch to zoom, you don't have 3-finger or 4-finger gestures as well. You don't have Windows gestures either. So moving on to the touchscreen, it does work as intended, but the sensitivity on the touchscreen is not as high as like iPads, but it's definitely good enough for general use. The screen also does wobble a little bit when you touch it, but you can't really do much about that. Voyo already made the screen as stiff as possible. There is also an included stylus, and this stylus is actually not pressure sensitive, so it actually works more like a really good capacitive stylus instead of an expensive stylus. Even then, it's not great for notes because you have to lift the pen pretty far off the screen in order to get the pen to deactivate, and if you don't, then you start getting a lot of trails along your notes, which doesn't look very nice. We have a 1920 by 1080 resolution on the 13.3-inch screen, and colors are a little bit on the cool side, but color reproduction is pretty accurate, and reading stuff from laptop distance is generally very crisp and clear as well. The max brightness goes up to 300 nits of brightness, which is good enough to use on a cloudy day, but if you try and use it in sunshine, it's pretty hard to see the screen. The minimum brightness also isn't very dim, so if you try and use it in pitch black, it's probably going to blind you. The audio quality on here is surprisingly decent. There is a little bit of bass, so good enough for TV shows and movies, and the clarity of the speakers is definitely one of the better ones out there among Chinese laptops. However, the speakers are on the bottom, so you do need to place the laptop on a hard surface for maximum volume output, and even then the maximum volume isn't actually very loud. Have a listen for yourself. So the battery life here is good, but not great. I get around 8 hours of use per day, and that would include mostly web browsing, some documents and some watching of TV shows, and some of that web browsing actually included YouTube as well. I ran a couple of battery tests as well. The laptop was able to play video for about 8 hours and 20 minutes before it died, and it was able to browse the web for about 7 hours and 19 minutes before it died. This is a little worse than equivalent Atom devices, but a little better than equivalent Core M devices. Performance-wise, the Pentium N4200 actually performs on par with a Core M in terms of light tasks, for example, opening and closing Windows Store apps or web browsing, which is pretty impressive. What's even more impressive is that I can edit 1080p video in DaVinci Resolve, and performance in the timeline is actually pretty good as well. Obviously, exporting it takes 4 to 5 times longer than my desktop, but it really impressed me that such a low-end Pentium processor was able to process 1080p video quite effectively. Gaming-wise, I could play Dota 2 between 25 to 30 frames per second on 1080p, which is pretty impressive. The Atom devices I've tested usually can only do that at 720p. I was also able to play Skyrim between 25 to 30 frames per second on 720p as well. Do note that what you see here is going to look laggier than what you would expect for 25 to 30 frames per second, and that is because I had Fraps running, which definitely has an impact on the frame rate. Now with benchmark scores, the processor here got quite a bit better scores compared to Atom processors, but in the grand scheme of things, the The scores here are still rather unimpressive. The scores I got in Geekbench was actually almost double what I got for the Atom processor. I got some pretty decent scores for Cinebench as well as Octane as well. Compare those to Atom's and those are definitely pretty good results, but they still lag behind Core M processors. So I checked out the USB ports as well, and they were able to power my USB 3 external hard drive, and speeds were pretty good. I could get read speeds of up to 85 megabytes a second. So in conclusion, I like this Pentium N4200 a lot. And performance-wise, it can perform on par with a Core M in terms of light tasks, for example, opening and closing Windows apps, web browsing, and it can edit 1080p video pretty effectively as well, which I'm very impressed with. That being said though, this laptop is definitely not going to be a workhorse computer, but the rest of the laptop is decent. You have a nice screen, you have decent build quality as well as decent battery. But keep in mind that audio isn't the loudest and this laptop is pretty big and heavy as well. So the biggest concern I have with this laptop is actually the price. It starts at around $400, and at that price you can actually get quite a few Core M tablets for that price. And if you're willing to spend $400 on a device, you might as well go with a Core M tablet anyways. But once the price goes down on these Pentium or Celeron processors, then this is going to be a great deal. It sits squarely between the Atom and the Core M processors, and it fills that niche pretty nicely. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.